Irene Moore, Oneida's first chairwoman. Irene Moore was the first woman to be elected to serve as chairperson of the United Nations in 1963. She served a full term just before the U.S. Civil Rights Act had been passed. This was an era of significant change for the United Nations. Housing, education, and tribal government were never the same after Irene Moore was elected. During an era in which the government encouraged Native Americans to leave the reservation and assimilate into the American mainstream, Irene remained committed to live on her reservation and work to recover land, build homes, and improve the quality of life in Oneida. She encouraged young graduates to go and get college degrees so they could come home to help their people. Irene was a very strong woman who was married to a farmer, Simon Moore. Together they farmed their land for close to 50 years. Simon, known to most as Sim, was a member of the Brotherton tribe. They raised 3 daughters, Lois Paulus, Margaret Danforth, and Lillian King. As described by her daughters, Irene was a leader who was patient and always willing to explain things to her people, just as she understood them. If you disagreed with her, she respected your opinion and continued to love you just as she had before. She was a hard worker and dedicated her efforts to make Oneida a better place to live for all people. Irene was engaged in more activities than young women today could hold a candle to, as the old folks would say. She was an active member of the Methodist Church. She was a farmer's wife, which was a 12-hour daily job. She was a devoted mother, and somehow she found the time to get involved in her community. Irene was an activist before the term was coined. She got involved and attended meetings during an era when she still had to make sure there was a meal on the table for her family every night and up at the crack of dawn every morning. Irene was a staunch advocate for housing, education, and tribal employment. She always believed young people should get a job out of high school if they weren't going to college. She also found time to volunteer for the Oneida language program. She was a fluent speaker of Ongohoineha Jinidwawanodas, or the Oneida language, and was willing to help young people learn and spell the language. Irene advocated spelling the language the way it sounded. She would say, "Only you have to read it, so make it so you can read your own writing." Irene served on the tribal council for about a decade. During her tenure, the Oneida Reservation was mostly unpaved roads with no industry and very scarce employment. The living conditions were more than substandard. Many homes were without plumbing and some without electricity. Irene was driven to take advantage of federal assistance to establish adequate housing on the Oneida Reservation. Chairwoman Irene Moore led the Oneida Council to establish the Oneida Housing Authority, which opened the doors to federal housing programs in this community. Irene Moore was the epitome of leadership, and although she was not considered to be a traditional Oneida, her values and her personal philosophy was in line with the traditions and culture of the Oneida tribe. She put family first and foremost, and she worked to create the kind of community she could be proud of. She loved her family, friends, and community. The Irene Moore Activity Center is named in her honor and is located at 2040 Airport Drive, and most times it is referred to as the IMAC or Bingo Hall. What we fail to recall on a daily basis is it is named to honor the first woman to serve as chairwoman of the United Nations.